We all seen cyber breaches happening day after day, but let's focus on what's new: supply chain attacks. So we saw this with MOVID in 2023, where a zero-day was used to attack the software and exfiltrate data. We saw this with Okta, right? Okta was a login tool that you use commonly across organizations. The support systems was compromised, and again, data was recreated. Recently, we saw this with Salesloft and Drift. Many companies, including cyber companies, were hit by this. Threat actors managed to exfiltrate data, and interestingly, we see that it's not the company, it's the integration that was hit, the supply chain that was hit, that led to breaches across the board. So it's not my fault, right? I didn't get breached, but my supplier caused me to get breached. So today we'll be exploring a North Korean operation, right, that we have a pretty cool name for it. We call it Phantom Circuit. We'll look at what happened, how did they do it, what broke down, what were the weaknesses around it, and last but not least, what must change for us to keep defending our cyber defenses as well. So as we spoke about it, supply chain itself, it's now the modern threat frontier. We see about 30% of breaches, all in all, is either directly or indirectly related to the supply chain. So coming through your third parties or your vendors, suppliers, and they're exploiting the trust that you have with the vendors, suppliers, and partners to target organizations. In Phantom Circuit, they even attack your trusted infrastructure. So your updates, your updates for your code, the NPMs as well as to include payloads, malicious payloads into the shared code bases as well. So when we see this itself, we can see that the attack surface has expanded beyond your control, right? I can't control shared code base, right? Because it's common across the world. From a timeline perspective, when we look back in time, looking at when they set up the infrastructure, the creation date and all that, we see that the operations started in September 2024. They set up the infrastructure, they began deploying their payload, and started to prepare their attacks as well. In November, they targeted Europe as a focus. We can see very targeted reconnaissance in Europe itself, where the red dot area, we have about 181 victims in total just in November. In December, just the very next month, we see India and Brazil being attacked, about 1,225 organizations being hit by this. And in January, just India alone had about 110 organizations out of 233 victims as well. So the way that the North Korean threat actors bypassed the defenses itself was very interesting. So we know it's North Korean IP addresses because when we work backwards, we can see it comes from North Korea. They use off-the-shelf Astral VPN to first obfuscate the connection, and then they use Oculus proxies, which is based in Russia itself, to relay their traffic towards a C2, which is hosted in Stark Industries. So Stark Industries is interesting because this organization is known as a bulletproof hosting, which means they ignore all legal and law enforcement against the organization. They're based in UK, and they started about 2 weeks right before Russia invaded Ukraine. So they are now very known for DDoS attacks, for disinformation campaigns, especially in Europe and against Ukraine as well. So as you can see, the setup itself is very interesting. They have taken deliberate steps to mask the connection back to North Korea itself, right? So multiple steps to connect and block attribution back into North Korea. With Stark Industries itself, it's hosting the C2. The C2 is connected to different RDP services that were trying to exfiltrate data back into the C2 itself. What's interesting itself is that there's persistent RDP access that can last up to 10 days, right? So 10 days is a very long time to have RDP access. Most of the times we have it for a couple of hours, we will detect it. But there were persistent RDP access to victims itself for about 10 days, continuous access of 10 days to exfiltrate data. And as you can see again, multiple layers to hide data. And again, using off-the-shelf where the data was then exfiltrated into Dropbox. So what was interesting at the same time was a connection from the Stark Industries, the C2, to Dropbox. One of the connections we can see lasted about 5 hours. So you can imagine the amount of volume of data that they're trying to transfer in 5 hours. Today, when you, let's say, get a few gigabytes of data, it's just a few minutes. But 5 hours of data transfer, that's terabytes of data that you can see going through as well. So one of the things that when we look into the C2 platform, command control platform, which was hosted on Stark Industries earlier, is that they're using modern day programming. They're using React and Node.js, which demonstrates a shift towards having a modern day attack infrastructure. At the same time, the C2 is unique in a way where it contains the capability to sort the data and file and classify the data itself. So they had data that can look at the system itself to track the data itself, what PC device it is, what IP it is, what system, what operating systems that they're collecting data from. They have credentials management because they're collecting leaked credentials across the board as well. They're looking at browser stock credentials, URL. So if you save your password in your browsers, that's what they're trying to steal as well. And all the different authentication tokens that you have that's saved in your device. And last but not least, activity logs that they were trying to steal from organizations for future streamlined operations, right? So all of this itself is very indicative of a high level and technical expertise that because they are putting in advanced management tools right into the C2. So typically when we see North Korean operations, what they do is they exfiltrate data as quickly as possible and then sort the data after they've gotten the data itself, right? They typically don't do it inside the C2. It also shows a very deliberate effort to build capabilities that can attack at scale, right? So it's not a targeted or focused attack, it's a scale attack against organizations while trying to evade detection with off-the-shelf tools and obfuscating the way that they're connecting to the C2 itself. So when we kind of look at the science itself, how do we know it's North Korea, right? It's not something that is simple to look at. Attribution is one of the hardest things we do in threat intelligence. So it's not circumstantial evidence, but all the different signs from your network artifacts where we look at North Korean IP addresses, we see the operational tradecraft that they use are very consistent with previous exploitations. We see Oculus proxy going through the Russian servers as well, handling all the major C2 connections. That's also a very clear sign of the way that they operate. And we know for a fact the bad boys in Europe as well, they're all connected, especially we see this in the Russia-Ukraine war as well. We see a tool reuse across the board, right? Where S2 VPN infrastructure was also seen in previous North Korean operations. And last but not least, we see when we did hypothesis, what if this is not North Korean, right? What if this is other threat like this as well? We can see that there's a high confidence that this does belong to Lazarus, and Lazarus is an APT connected to the North Korean operations as well. So how bad was it really? We see in total about 1,500 companies that were hit globally across multiple sectors, but there was a very clear emphasis on crypto platforms as well as developer tools. So what they were trying to hit, of course, North Koreans, they love crypto because that's a way, an easiest way to hide the tracks and collect money across the board. But developer platforms and authentication services was interesting because they were trying to get at scale capabilities for future operations, right? To be able to get login credentials, to get authentication tokens, so they can attack in the future as well and collect data across the board. Infra companies as well was also interesting, and the way that they store the data itself was around your login credentials, your API keys, your tokens, your cookies, again, indicative of future operations that they were preparing for, right? So even though it's a major operation, you can see it's the first phase of it, right? They're collecting login credentials for future attacks that they're planning that we don't yet see. So when we looked at why it failed, right? Why did we not detect this? Why majority of companies didn't detect this? A lot of it looked like normal traffic patterns, right? Because they were targeting your updates, your auto updates, especially with your code base. If you're a developer, what we do is we typically update our code, especially if you use GitHub and things like that. We automatically download the code, use the freshest data points as well, right? That's one of the ways that they're targeting shared code base today. We see this because there is an excessive confidence in developers' pipelines and automated updates. So recent attacks against your NPM packages is proving it again, right? You can't, unfortunately, you can't apply updates immediately as they come out, right? Because those updates can be corrupted. Right, there may be areas where the shared code base itself is targeted for corruption. Last but not least, it's also over-reliance on promises. We rely on vendors to promise to do the best, but we don't do the check, right? We always say we trust, but we verify, right? So how do we verify promises in this case? So having continuous assessment is important because we need to move from a trust model to making sure that the vendors have a continuous verification across the board as well. So what actually works in this case that successfully defended against this attack was validate everything, right? So unfortunately, we're in a situation where you have to verify everything, even signatures, even the package and updates that you're getting from the source itself. You have to monitor continuously, right? Because there is attacks now against trusted sources of updates, right? Especially NPM packages that we are seeing. Make sure they're monitoring that. Audit all your activities, right? Again, you can't defend what can see, right? So you need to have full visibility in order to defend. And last but not least is, of course, have the conversations, right? The bad guys are not shy by sharing the techniques, tools, tactics across the board. Even if we are breached, we need to be sharing that story within the community so that everyone learns the same lesson and be able to actively defend against future such attacks as well. So first and foremost, make sure that you have continuous verification, validate all your system components in real time. Number two, make sure that you have automated monitoring, especially across your critical infrastructure. And security, it's a top-down initiative, right? It's very hard to do it from a bottom-up. The leadership from organizations need to enforce cybersecurity across the culture within the company. If you are a high-value target, make sure that you have isolation technology, especially when you're dealing with risky developments as well, where you're trusting updates from the internet. Make sure that you have oversight in real time. Having that visibility is key, especially when you have RDP connections or remote connections across the board. Have vigilance, right? So teams need to be trained to look out for this type of events, right? It cannot be reliant on human knowledge, right? Not everyone has the same level of knowledge. So continuous awareness and training is important, and that's why we need to prime for your defense. And last but not least is to ensure that your supply chain is continuously validated, right? You can't trust them once and use them forever. It has to be continuous verification across the board. So those that are really in the high-risk sector is again the crypto platforms, right? Crypto platforms have been heavily targeted, especially by the North Korean operations. We see financial technologies being targeted as well. So not the banks, but the technology that supports the banks, right? So the financial technologies sector as well. And last but not least is, of course, the critical SaaS providers. When you have multi-tenant security and data isolation protocols as well, make sure that you have continuous monitoring and validate all your suppliers as well, right? So no company stands alone today. Make sure that you verify everything. So don't become a headline, right? As much as possible, no one wants to be the headline. So act now, right? Today's attacks are continuously persistent. They're automated, especially with AI today. And in fact, I just saw an article yesterday saying that AI MCP servers, the malicious MCP servers are released. So MCP servers are the way for AI to talk to each other, right? So if you have a malicious MCP, it can poison the AI into doing something that you didn't want it to do. And they are very fast today. So an attack can happen shorter than the time the light from the sun reaches the Earth, right? So the amount of time the light from the sun reaches the Earth is about 4 minutes, right? Attacks can happen less than that, right? Successful attacks as well. So make sure you have continuous verification, not periodic assessment, and verify your vendors, your supply chain, and processes as quickly as possible. We've also seen other North Korean operations across the board, right? Here are some articles around it. And with that, thank you very much, right? Let's make sure that you have continuous verification, conduct your supply chain as quickly as possible, and strengthen your security posture. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Han Yang Lang, for that very informative presentation. And like he said, let us not wait for us to be the headlines. Let's do something about it. And as we're very visual, that is why we have prepared something for you. So if you take a look, here's a visual summary of what he just spoke about. You can take a photo of this. He said, remember that we trust what we verify. And he also put some pointers on how to watch out for the supply chain attacks. You should also verify your partners, suppliers, and vendors always. And of course, this also will help you learn about the modern threats. You should check the threat factors, have hacktivity, I like that word, and opportunistic actors.
Cyberspace, the ultimate business frontier, where the sky's the limit for growth and vulnerabilities. Like AI-enhanced threat actors planning devastating attacks. But not on Security Scorecard's watch. With a complete view of the attack surface and supply chain, Security Scorecard identifies and resolves risks, keeping companies ahead of any threat. Powering supply chain cyber risk management to the max. And combining the Galaxy's best platform, threat intel, and expertise to fortify the entire business ecosystem. So, to any company out there navigating its cyber odyssey, chart a course for confidence with Security Scorecard.